I mean, they wouldn't put it on a kid's book if it wasn't true, would they? Well, wait a minute. The bathtub ark is on a kid's book, so yeah, we don't really know what the fruit was, but I thought we just ought to touch on that. I found this painting when I was researching this, which I thought was pretty cool. You can't really tell what it is. It looks like it might be an apple in this, so who knows, but you got Adam and Eve, and then it may be hard for you guys to see. I'll blow it up in a minute, but here's the serpent, and then he's kind of got the top torso of a man and a devil, and then down below here you see them being banished and death and the angel here, and then up in the very top you see Jesus on the cross, and there's a depiction of baptism up there. So it's pretty cool painting, really. I like it. I got a zoom in here of that part. I just thought it was kind of cool. It still looks kind of like an apple. I wish they wouldn't make it look like an apple, because we really don't know what it was. Probably not an apple. Probably not something that we've ever seen before. So I like this. This is from a kid's book from Answers in Genesis, and this shows it being some unknown but very delicious looking fruit, which I suspect that was the case. And then, of course, when they sin and have to leave, and you see they're clothed now, and here's the animal. In this case, they show it as being a sheep that God had to kill so that there could be blood to forgive their sins. All right. While we're talking about that in the Garden of Eden, I thought we might go over this, just a couple slides here. So put your thinking caps on. I'm going to ask you what's wrong with the next picture, okay? So who knows what's wrong with that? Who can tell me? Do you know? Huh? No animals? There were animals? Yeah, well, I think there was animals in the Garden of Eden. God created the animals on day 6. Anybody else? Well, what about that? You don't think there's cats and dogs? Not those kind, correct. Yeah, that's what's wrong with it. You got a kind of a domesticated cow, and you got a house cat and a wretched mutant poodle there, which should be outlawed, but that's another topic. Those kinds of animals were probably not in the garden. We've made those as hybrids and bred them for certain characteristics from the original kind. Probably the original kind looked more something like this, some kind of a big oxy kind of a thing, and probably a lion-looking thing and a coyote wolf deal. And those were then what we have now were bred from those after the ark at some point. So, I didn't have a video last week, but I got 2 videos for you this week. How many Princess Bride fans do we have? So, hopefully you'll like this then. I had to edit it because it was this scene is just too long for us to do and have time to do everything else that we need to. So there's a couple of little jumps in there where I edited it. I hope you'll forgive me for that, but you can go home and pull out your DVDs or get on YouTube and watch the full scene afterwards if you want to. Maddie or somebody, there's nobody in the sound booth. Yeah, I need somebody to click on that for me. Well, now
you're that smart.
Let me put it this way. Have you ever heard of Plato, Aristotle, Socrates?
Yes.
Morons.
Really? In that case, I challenge you to a battle of wits.
For the princess? To the death? I accept.
Good. Then pour the wine. What you do not smell is called iocane powder. It is odorless, tasteless, dissolves instantly in liquid, and is among the more deadly poisons known to man. All right. Where is the poison? The battle of wits has begun. It ends when you decide and we both drink and find out who is right and who is dead.
But it's so simple. All I have to do is divine from what I know of you. Are you the sort of man who would put the poison into his own goblet or his enemy's? Now, a clever man would put the poison into his own goblet because he would know that only a great fool would reach for what he was given. I'm not a great fool, so I can clearly not choose the wine in front of you. But you must have known I was not a great fool. You would have counted on it, so I can clearly not choose the wine in front of me. First, let's drink. Me from my glass, and you from yours.
You guessed wrong.
You only think I guessed wrong. That's what's so funny. I switched glasses when your back was turned. Ha ha, you fool. You fell victim to one of the classic blunders. The most famous is never get involved in a land war in Asia, but only slightly less well known is this: never go in against a Sicilian when death is on the line.
Who are you?
I'm no one to be trifled with. That is all you ever need know.
To think, all that time it was Shortcut that was poisoned.
They were both poisoned. I spent the last few years building up an immunity to iocane powder.
The point of that is, what we're going to do next is a little class exercise. And what I don't want you to do, I don't want you to do a Vizzini on me and try to think, oh, what's he want me to say? Does he want me to say this, or does he want me to say that, and second guess me? That never ends well, as you can see. And also, none of you should get involved in a land war in Asia either, because that doesn't end war well. Play Risk, you'll have some experience with that maybe. But there was recently a new creature found in the fossil record, and I'd like to show you a picture of the skull. Here is the skull. Now, my question to you is, now just be honest, just your first blush. If you look at this, would you think, oh, that's probably, a plant eater, maybe something like a cow or something, or is that a meat eater, something that, tears its prey apart? So raise your hand if you think it's a herbivore, a plant eater. Okay, we got a few. All right, raise your hand if you think it's a carnivore. Oh, we got a few more. Okay, keep your hands up. Carnivores, keep your hands up. Okay, now what if I said that scientists took that skull and they did a reconstruction of what the thing would have actually looked like with skin and muscle and everything on it, and this is what it looked like. Now, if you want to change your vote, and you herbivore people, are you gonna raise your hands and say, yeah, that's probably a meat eater? Anybody? Okay, you can put your hands down now. Well, in reality, it's a camel. And so it's not some extinct animal, and it is not a meat eater, it is a plant eater. And so this is an example of evolutionary thinking that just permeates our culture and really us, because we see it all the time. Because we tend to think if you have great big teeth, that's for eating meat. So the question is, how did God create the animals? Did he create them to be meat eaters? No, we'll look at that in a minute. So, let's see, here's a picture of all three of them together, but I love that because in truth, it's not really very easy to tell which things are plant eaters and which things are meat eaters by just their skull and their teeth. And of course, we know that everything was created to eat plants originally. Here's one for you. This is a skull of something. So if you were just, not thinking about it too hard, what would you say about that? Yeah, it looks like a carnivore. It's got those big old sharp teeth up front. I wouldn't want to meet that thing on a dark alley. But really, it's a panda. Yeah, look at that. Oh, there we go. And he uses those nice sharp teeth to eat and strip bamboo. So they're pretty well adapted for that, not for tearing other animals apart. I really like this because you can see those little sharp teeth sticking out there. But he is definitely a plant eater. So which animals were created as carnivores? And of course we said none. All animals were plant eaters. And some of those behaviors and characteristics may have been pre-programmed in and came out after the fall or possibly even after the flood. Sometimes, even today in our fallen world, it's been 6,000 years since the creation, we can get glimpses of what it might have been like before the fall and even in the Garden of Eden. And you won't be able to read this, but here's a very interesting article from Creation Magazine, and it's about the lion that would not eat meat. So this was last century. These folks had this lioness, this cub, and it absolutely refused to eat meat. And so some veterinarians and other people convinced them that this would not help. Get this lion to eat meat, it's not going to be able to grow. And so they tried everything to get it to eat meat. It wouldn't touch meat. They thought, well, maybe they need to acclimate it to the taste and things. So they were bottle feeding it milk. So they started putting some drops of blood in the milk. No go, would not touch it. Even one drop of blood in a bottle of milk, that lion would not touch it, would not eat it. It was amazing. But she survived and even thrived on her diet. She cooked grain, raw eggs, and milk. They would just mix it all up together. And she grew up to be 352 pounds. And this is interesting because lions do need to chew on hard stuff to keep their teeth and their gums healthy. And so they gave her some bones to chew on. Nope, she would not chew on even bones without any meat or anything. They had to give her rubber boots to chew on to keep her gums healthy. And what was interesting was because of that, they had her like out in a pasture. These folks had kind of a menagerie of all kinds of animals, and she would just, be out there with sheep and birds and other things. You can see here the owner lady is bottle feeding the lion and a lamb right there, and it's kind of hard to see, but there's the lion with some birds coming up to it right there, and here she is in a convertible car with a couple of people. And this is a funny picture here. They've got her placed in like a butcher shop with meat hanging up, and they're trying to give her a rack of ribs, and she's turning her head away like, nope, don't want any of that stuff. So pretty interesting. So that is somewhat of a glimpse of what it might have been like in the Garden of Eden. So let's go read some scripture. Who wants to read this, huh? Derek, you going to read this for me? There you go.
Then God said, Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the surface of all the earth, and every tree which has fruit yielding seed. It shall be food for you, and to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the sky, and to everything that moves on the earth which has life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so.
Thank you. Okay. Every beast of the field I have given every green plant. So I think we all agree that that's how God created things originally. And then I think this is interesting. This is from Isaiah. You want to read that for me?
And the wolf will dwell with the lamb, and the leopard will lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little boy will lead them. Also the cow and the bear will graze. Their young will lie down together, and the lion will eat straw like an ox. The nursing child will play by the hole of the cobra, and the weaned child will put his hand on the viper's den.
Thank you. Yeah, great. Yeah, so that's what it's going to be like in the final state in heaven. And so I thought it was interesting, the calf and the young lion and the fatling together. And so we sort of saw that with that lioness, and the lion will eat straw like an ox. So it can happen, and animals can survive that way. I did want to point out, though, I don't think we've talked about this in here yet, but Adam and Eve, of course, were vegetarian originally. But one thing a lot of people don't realize is that in the Garden of Eden, besides the tree, the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, and the tree of life, they also had another pretty special tree. It was called the stake tree. And so, there was a branch with T-bones, and there was a branch with New York strip, and of course my favorite, ribeyes. And so they hacked those babies off and throw them on the grill, and they'd have steak, but they didn't have to kill animals to get it. So there you go. I'm only halfway teasing with that. I suspect that the fruit and vegetables that they had, they may have had some varieties that we don't have, or some of the same things, but they were much higher in protein content probably than some of what we have now. But anyway, I like that steak plant. So we're going to shift gears again and say, is there any evidence that dinosaur bones and fossils may be younger than 65 million years old? So this is something that that we hear evolutionists tell us sometimes. They say, well, how come we don't find human fossils with dinosaur fossils? If humans and dinosaurs lived together and God created all 6,000 years ago, why don't we find their fossils together? That's a good question. And so, let's see, oops, I went back one. Well, this is Dr. Mary Schweitzer, and she's an evolutionist. She's a professor at North Carolina State University, and she spends a lot of her time doing archaeological digs up in Montana. And she was doing an interesting experiment a few years ago. She was taking some of these dinosaur bones that she found from her dig, and she was putting it in a weak acid to see if she could dissolve away the bone and see what kind of structure was left behind. And very interesting, this is what she found. She found that inside that bone, there was soft tissue, even to the point of still being elastic and being kind of stretchy, okay? So, what do you think? Does that indicate that these things are 65 million years old? I don't think so. I think this jives very much better with the Bible and the biblical time frame. But this is an example of how evolutionary thinking actually hurts you in doing real science. You know, a lot of times the evolutionists will tell us, oh, if you're a creationist, you can't be a real scientist. You can't do real science because that creation belief, that'll prevent you from doing, real work. Well, in this case and many other cases, actually the belief in evolution is what prevents you from doing real work, because the evolutionists would have never thought to look. We should have thought. I hate that we didn't do it before now, but now they found this soft tissue in all kinds of dinosaur bones. This is one supposed to be 68 million years old, and you can even see blood vessels and a red blood cell right there. It's incredible. Honestly, even assuming these are 4,500 years old from the flood, it's pretty incredible that they would still be there. But no way could they be 65 million or more. Here's some more pictures of some of the stuff they're getting out of these bones now that they're actually looking for it. All kinds of cool stuff. That's a good question. That's actually a good lead-in. Brett asked, what was her conclusion if she found it? She's an evolutionist, right? I'm going to tell you a story about that. Just bear with me. I'll tie it in here. This is a story that Dr. James Dobson put in his book, The Strong-Willed Child. And it was about this guy who was getting his MD, his degree to be a medical doctor. And I guess when you do that, toward the end, you have to do residencies and different specialties around. And he was doing a residency in a mental hospital, okay? And so there was this guy there in the mental hospital who was convinced that he was dead. Okay, we'll say his name was Bob, and he thought he was dead. And so this doctor was just fascinated and every day he'd spend hours and hours talking to this guy, trying to reason with him and get him to think that maybe he wasn't really dead. And so one day they were talking and sitting at a table there, and the doctor says, so Bob, I got a question for you. Do dead people bleed? And Bob says, oh no, dead people don't bleed. Everybody knows that. That's silly. And the doctor says, well, I agree. He says, give me your hand. So he takes Bob's hand, and he has a little needle, and he just pricks his finger a little bit and then squeezes it really hard and gets a drop of blood out, and then turns around and shows it to him, and he says, what do you think about that? And Bob looked at his finger and said, son of a gun, dead people do bleed. That is exactly what Mary Schweitzer and the evolutionists have done with this. They have that evidence for all those soft tissues that we know could not have lasted for millions of years, but then they come out and say, oh, well, I guess those kinds of things do last that long under certain conditions, which to me, is about as crazy as the guy who thinks he's dead. But, all right, so they couldn't be that old. We know from lab experiments, and this is actual science, actual operational science, not historical science, where we can look at these things and we can measure and see how long they can last. And they couldn't last even a fraction of 68 or 70 million years. All right, so I think this is extremely strong evidence for the biblical timescale, particularly for the flood of 4,500 years ago. And that's where all these fossils came from. Okay, so I got a little ahead of myself before. So now the question is, if humans and dinosaurs live together, then why don't we find human fossils with dinosaur fossils? Anybody ever hear that? Well, when I get asked this question, I say one word. I may not pronounce this right, but I say coelacanth. I bet you didn't think I was going to say that, did you? Anybody ever heard of a coelacanth? Oh, Bob has. Okay. Yeah, okay, good. I'm glad a few people have. Well, a coelacanth is, is an extinct fish, and they're found in the same rock layers where we find dinosaurs. So I don't believe these time scales, but if going by the evolutionist time scales, you don't find them any higher than about what they would say was 65 million years ago. So they appear to have gone extinct about the same time as the dinosaurs. We don't find them up in any higher strata. They're fossils, and so they're known to be extinct. So if you ask an evolutionist, do coelacanth ever live with humans? And they would say no. And there's a nice picture of a coelacanth, and there's a picture of a live one and a scuba diver. So it turns out coelacanth are not extinct. The way the story I've heard goes is it was in the 1920s, and there was a guy that was an archaeologist or paleontologist, and he was in Indonesia in this like open air fish market, where they go catch fish and bring them and lay them out, and you can buy them for food. And he sees this coelacanth that had been freshly caught. And he thought that's what it was, so he mounted an expedition. They went out and looked in the ocean around there, and sure enough, they found a bunch of these things living out there. So, that would, from a paleontological perspective, that would be equivalent to finding a live dinosaur, because we don't find their fossils any higher than where we find the dinosaurs. But yet, we know that they live with people because they're alive today. So, here's another one. Here's the dawn redwood fossils. It's a fossilized tree that they used to have back sometime. So if we go by the evolutionist time scales, now these you find a little higher than you do coelacanth and dinosaur fossils, but you don't find them any more recent than what they would say was 5 million years ago, and all the way back to 56 million years ago. So kind of nice. And there's one in my yard. They found them growing in this isolated valley in China back in the 1940s. So I actually have a couple of them. And so in this picture, can you find the two living fossils? Yes, PJ. Well, not so much people. The question is, in the massive graveyards, are there dinosaurs and human bones? You just don't find a lot of human bones in the fossils at all. And I think it's because the humans, sought higher ground, and they were the last things to be drowned. And if they were fossilized, they're of the very highest layers, and maybe they weren't fossilized at all because they didn't get buried by the sediment and such. And so there are what they call out-of-place fossils, but in general, we don't find any humans like that. And so we need to explain that, certainly. So, all right, so this is my dawn redwood tree. This is my other dawn redwood tree. As you can see there, nice and big. One of the things I love about these, besides the fact that they're a living fossil and that people thought they were extinct because you didn't find fossils of them above a certain line, I love it because they grow about 3 feet a year. So if you have the right conditions, you can have a big old gnarly Dawn redwood living fossil in your yard. And so it turns out there's lots of these things. There's all kinds of these living fossils that at one time scientists, because they're, I would say, blinded by their evolutionary thought, think things were extinct, and they found them. And people have whole museums dedicated to these organisms and showing fossils and then recent live ones next to it. So there's a whole bunch of those. So I think that's kind of cool, and I would say that's more strong evidence that the Bible is true. So let's talk about another one. This is a bit of a preview of what we're going to do on our last meeting together, but I thought it was okay to put it in here. It's kind of fun. So has anybody ever heard that there might be a living dinosaur in Africa somewhere, in the Congo? The natives call it, I'm going to butcher this, but Mokele Mbibi. Say that with me. Mokele Mbibi. There's all kinds of things about this, and let me say, I don't know if there's really a living dinosaur there. I think it would be pretty extraordinary if there was, but I thought it'd be fun to look at this a little bit. I'm not basing my faith on this, if it's really true or not, but these natives that live in this area where Mokele Mbibi is supposed to be, researchers have taken like picture books with pictures of all different animals in them. And what happens is if they show them a picture of an animal that they are familiar with, like a lion or a cheetah or something like that, then they'll point at it and they'll say the name. And if you show them a picture of an animal they've never seen before, like a brown bear or something like that they don't have, they just look at it and kind of shake their head like, I don't know what that is. And if you at the same time show them a picture of a long-necked dinosaur, they point at it and say, Mokele Mbibi. So, that doesn't prove anything. But here's what's interesting. This Dr. Roy Mackal, who's an evolutionist, not a creationist, he eventually wrote a book called A Living Dinosaur. It's out of print, but on page 320 and 321, there's 3 photos that are pretty interesting. He was in Africa in 1966, and so this is the area where he was, very, very remote, and this is in part of the Congo where Mokele Mbibi is supposed to be. And so what happened was, as he was shooting photos, now, you young people aren't going to know what I'm talking about here, but he had a 35 millimeter camera which took film, these little canisters of film. And what you do is you thread the film in and start winding it up, and then usually what you do is there was a leader on the film that wasn't actually good for taking pictures, so you need to get the leader past, once you close it up, past where the aperture for the camera was, so you could actually take a picture. So most photographers just snap a few pictures and wind the film and advance it so they get to a good place on the film. And that's what he was doing. He was pointing at the ground doing that. Well, when he got back to wherever he was from and developed the film, this is what he found. It's kind of hard to see, but there's a footprint there that he didn't actually notice when he was there, but here it is. It's kind of like this 3-toed footprint. And if we look at casts from dinosaur tracks and footprints we find in the fossil record, it looks a heck of a lot like whatever made that impression. Now, again, I don't know if there's really a living dinosaur there. Even if there was in 1966, he might not be there now. He might have died. But I think it's interesting and kind of fun to look at, so I thought you guys might like that. So, this is the last section, probably the longest section we're going to do here. What kind of tools or technology did people have before the flood? And the other part of that is, do we have any idea what those things were? Do we have any remnants of those? Anything left over that we found that shows any of that? So we're going to talk about that. But I want to say again about this that the things I'm going to show you, I think there's probably better evidence for some of them than others, but as a whole, these kinds of things are not what I'm basing my faith on. Okay, if I found out that all the things I'm going to show you are hoaxes or fake or not really from where they say they were, that wouldn't faze my faith in the least, and I hope the same for you. But I do think it's kind of fun to check some of these things out and see what we think about them. So I did quite a bit of research this week on this. Let's see. Let's read some scripture. I guess somebody. Would you read for me? Do you care?
Cain had relations with his wife, and she conceived and gave birth to Enoch. And he built a city and called the name of the city Enoch, after the name of his son. Now to Enoch was born Irad, and Irad became the father of...
Oh, I gave you a terrible one, didn't I?
Did.
Yeah, Mehujael.
Mehujael. And Mehujael became the father of
Methushael.
And Methushael became the father of Lamech. Lamech took to himself 2 wives. The name of the one was Ada, and the name of the other Zillah. Ada gave birth to Jabal, and he was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the lyre and pipe. As for Zillah, she also gave birth to Tubal-Cain, the forger of all implements of bronze and iron, and the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry I gave you that. That was terrible, wasn't it? I should have reserved that for one of my enemies instead of you. So I'll try to do better next time. So I thought this was interesting, this section of Genesis 4. This is some of Cain's descendants, and I don't know if I highlighted some stuff. So, father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. Of course, we know that when Cain and Abel, Cain killed Abel, it was over some livestock. So they had livestock from way back, but now we see that they're making tents. But also, father of all those who play the lyre and the pipe. So they had technology, at least they were able to make musical instruments, we know from God's word, and also the forger of all implements of bronze and iron. So they had some kind of tech that they were able to do things like that. There's not a lot of information on that in the Bible. Like we said in the first class, the Bible is not a science textbook, so it doesn't always give us all the details of certain things that we want, but we can trust that the details it does give are accurate. So let's look at some artifacts that people have claimed might be from before the flood. So I would say, do we have any artifacts from before the flood? I'm giving it a really definite maybe. So the Baghdad Battery. I wanted to start off with this one, and I will say this is not a pre-flood artifact. Nobody, creationists, Christians, evolutionists, nobody thinks this is that old. They know it's somewhere between like 200 BC and 500 AD. But what's interesting is this thing appears to be some kind of a battery. So they found this clay pot jar thing, and then this copper tube that fits down inside of it, and then an iron rod that goes down inside of that. And some people think there was residue of an acidic liquid compound inside that. Now, if you were to do that and assemble that, that would be a battery. The interesting thing about this is that as far as we knew, batteries were only invented about 200 years ago, not 1,500 or 2,000 years ago. So, like I said, it's not a pre-flood artifact by any stretch of the means. But I do think a lot of people use it as an example that ancient people were not dumb, and they had many times technologies that we don't have. And I think we all know that on some level because, say, that like the pyramids, the biggest pyramids, we couldn't build now. We don't have the technology. There's also a temple down in South America where they have these humongous stones that weigh tons and tons up on this mountain in this temple. It's hundreds of years old. We know where they quarried the stone down in the valley, and we don't have a way to do that ourselves. We could not get those stones up to the top of that mountain with all of our machinery and everything. We have nothing that would move those. And somehow they did it, probably with a lot of slaves and manpower. But interesting, those stones are stacked up kind of like Legos, and even today, you can't take a credit card and put it between any two of those stones. The contacts are still so good. So they knew what they were doing. But anyway, back to the Baghdad Battery. Some people have recreated what they think this might have looked like when it was functional. It also had kind of a sealant around the top of some kind of like asphalt or pitch or something like that. Here's some more pictures of people who've recreated it. And it just so happens that the Mythbusters did an episode on this. So I got some clips of that. I thought you might find that interesting. Maddie, can you play that? This is the last video, so see if you can click on that. There you go.
This myth hinges on a single seemingly credible piece of archaeological evidence.
In the 1930s, an urn was found in Baghdad, and it dated to somewhere between 250 BC to 250 AD. And what they found in this urn was a copper pipe, an iron rod in the center. It had a cork made of asphalt at the top, and residue of an acidic liquid on the inside. So all of these things point to this being an ancient battery.
Is this a 2,000-year-old battery? Supposedly batteries were only invented 200 years ago. It's an urn containing an iron rod inside a copper pipe, suspended in acid. To test this story, the build team will make their own, and if it works, try to find out what it might have been used for. But ever the optimists, the build team goes into mass construction mode.
That's right.
That is beautiful. Lemon juice stings when it gets in your eye. That's a nice, tight fit. Now I'm going to test the voltage. 0.269. That's not a lot. The lemon gave us more than that.
A third of a volt. A shocker by any definition.
Oh, wait, yeah, there was a little bit of a shock.
Perhaps they'll do better by wiring all 10 of their new batteries together.
All right, here comes the moment of truth. Wait a minute, we have...
fried our...
Hey! Holy! We have 4 volts! 3 volts! Oh, yeah!
We did it.
A picture of efficiency this ain't. As big as a rack of bowling balls, as powerful as a half-dead flashlight. But it is a battery, an ancient battery. And now the question needs to be answered, what was it used for?
So I do want to point out that we don't know 100% for sure that this was really a battery. If you go on Wikipedia and some other sites and read about this, there are some skeptics who say that this was not a battery, and they claim that there were some very similar type containers found in Seleucia that actually contained scrolls, and they would take scrolls and they would wind the scrolls around the iron rod and then fit it down inside the copper tube and then put it inside these pots and seal it up for safekeeping. So I don't know. Maybe it was just, for scroll keeping. But I wanted to find some pictures of those to see how closely they looked to this original Baghdad battery thing. But I could not find, I only really found one site that talked about that, and there was no pictures. So I don't know. I'm kind of iffy on this, whether it was really a battery or not. But either way, it's not a pre-flood artifact. So let's dive into some things that people claim might be pre-flood artifacts. This is the Koso artifact. So what happened was, back in 1961, you had 3 folks in California, and they ran this little rock shop where people would come and buy cool rocks, and especially geodes and things. And they were out geode hunting about 6 miles northeast of Olancha, California, and they found all these rocks they thought might have been geodes. And the next day, one of the guys was in the shop, and he had this diamond bit saw, and he sawed one of these rocks in 2 to see if it was a geode inside. Geodes are very sparkly and glittery inside. And he cut it in 2, and he was very surprised to see a porcelain type material with a 2mm metal shaft down the middle. Very interesting. Also, it's hard to see in this picture, but there was a hexagon-shaped cavity around that, right where he happened to cut it at. And so a lot of people thought that this looks like a spark plug. They thought it was a primitive spark plug. Maybe. And so there was a lot of creationists that even gave this an example of something that was an example of pre-flood technology. So it was promoted by a lot of creationists. I've even showed it in some of my classes I've done in the past, and I'm glad I did some more research on this. One of the things was I didn't realize how it was found. I think this is key. Whenever people have these artifacts and make these claims about them, you need to pay attention to where they were found at, because this was not found in a mine or anything down under the ground in the rock layers or the coal or anything. This was just picked up on top of the ground, which is interesting. So they've done some more research on it, and they decided to x-ray this. And there's a picture of the outside, and it's kind of hard to see it here, but there's like the top of whatever this thing is kind of a little cylinder there of metal, and then here's a metal stem that's got some threads, what appear to be on it. And they x-rayed it, and that's what it looks like inside. And they sent those x-rays and the pictures to a bunch of guys that collect antique spark plugs. And several of these antique spark plug guys immediately saw that and said, oh yeah, that's a Champion spark plug from the 1920s. And so there is an x-ray of a Champion spark plug from the 20s, which looks pretty similar. And so now we think that is almost certainly what this thing is. It is not an ancient artifact from before the flood. But the fact that they picked this up on top of the ground probably should have clued people in about that it didn't come from down below. Now, it is encased in rock, and we do know that rock and minerals, under the right circumstances, can form very quickly. Sometimes our evolutionary friends might dispute that, but when they're shown something like this, they have to agree to that. Another interesting thing is here's a 7/8 inch thread fit perfectly in the hexagonal cavity. But anyway, the Koso artifact, I'm saying is probably not an ancient artifact. I think that was probably a spark plug from the 1920s. But let's go on and see if we can find any more. So, ancient coins in coal seams. Now, this was one I hadn't heard of till just a couple weeks ago, and Roger Tharp told me about this. And he sent me a link to a video on YouTube. And, of course, you have to be careful just getting stuff off YouTube videos. I couldn't find any other evidence for this besides one really short video, and here's some still pictures of these coins that in the video they claim were found in a coal mine in Illinois. And honestly, I don't even know if these are really the coins that they're saying were found, because the videos seem to be made up of just like stock footage of mining operations and stuff, not something that they filmed specifically for this. So I don't know. I would love if they found a bunch of coins, weird coins in a coal seam. I'd love to have some evidence for that, but I couldn't find anything else on it. So I'm pretty iffy on that. I think we need more info. But I will say, all you coal miners out there, keep your eyes open. You never know. You might find something. We'll see some stuff later that's been found in coal chunks and in coal mines. So we do see things like that at times. And my advice is, if you do find something like that in a piece of coal, keep it as much intact and in the coal as you can. Don't clean it or anything like that, because that destroys the evidence of where it came from. So this is a coin that was supposedly found in Illinois. This wasn't in a mine, it was in a well. They were drilling down about 114 feet in 1870. Sadly, nobody knows where this coin is. It has disappeared, but we have sketches of it, and it's kind of interesting. It's got, on one side, there's this lettering, what appears to be lettering around the edge, that no one knows what language that is. It's nothing that we know of today. And there's some kind of a warrior with a headdress on. Looks like he's getting ready to do away with an enemy there or something. And on the back is this weird thing that maybe it's some kind of animal with long ears, and it's got claws, and some people think this is a tail. Some more lettering. It's just kind of weird looking. And so we don't know what this is. It may have been a hoax that somebody made. We don't actually have the thing to look at. There's only sketches. I looked at it and I thought, hey, that looks like those maybe might have came out of the book Where the Wild Things Are, the kids' books, if you ever seen that book. It looks some of that. But anyway, here's some more sketches that you can see what some of this stuff looked like. But I'm pretty iffy on that. That would be cool if it was authentic and from before the flood, but when we don't actually have it to be able to test or anything, it's pretty hard to be very sure about that one. Okay, this is called the London Hammer. I wrote London, Texas Hammer because for a long time I thought it was from London, England, but it's actually from London, Texas. It was discovered in 1934 by members of the Hahn family, and so it's made of a strange alloy that's iron but has just a little bit of chlorine in it, and they claim it's very, very resistant to rusting and corrosion. They found out what the metal was by taking some scrapings of it, and where they scraped it never did ever corrode even after years, which is kind of interesting. But again, it was discovered above ground. They were just hiking around and found this thing. I don't know. I tend to think this is more just an old hammer that got, covered by minerals and not necessarily something from before the flood, mainly because of where it was from. But some people claim it might be much older than that. So this one is pretty interesting. This one I'm a little more optimistic on. So in Russia, in Vladivostok, Russia, they found this thing in a lump of coal that appeared to be man-made. There's a picture of it actually in the coal, and they were smart. They didn't break it apart and take it out until they took it to some people, some experts, and let them examine it. But when they got it out, it looks kind of like maybe it was man-made, maybe kind of like it's the teeth of some kind of a gearing system. And of course, this is a modern gear here just for comparison. But, it's not very much, but it does seem like that's got some possibilities, perhaps, for being that old. Let's see what else. Oh, they did X-ray diffraction on it, and it was most aluminum with 2 to 4% magnesium, which, again, is a unique alloy that we don't really make or use in these days. So, pretty interesting. Let's see, what do we got next? The iron pot found in Oklahoma coal. And this is another one from a coal mine. So I'll just read this to you. This was a kid. He signed this out in a notarized letter when he was older. But when he was 10 years old is when this happened. No, excuse me, strike that. That's one coming up. This one's different. This was a guy in a Oklahoma power plant. So I'll just read it. While I was working in the municipal electric plant in Thomas, Oklahoma in 1912, I came upon a solid chunk of coal which was too large to use. I broke it with a sledgehammer. The iron pot fell from the center, leaving the impression or mold of the pot in a piece of the coal. Jim Stoll, an employee of the company, witnessed the breaking of the coal and saw the pot fall out. I traced the source of the coal and found that it came from Wilburton, Oklahoma mines. So there you go. Is that from before the flood? Well, maybe. The Bible talks about metalworking and smelting and things, and so, yeah, they might have. They might have had certainly technology to build something like that. So I think that one's probably on the scale of things. That's a little more likely that it really did come from that long ago. And then the last one here, this one I really like. This is a bell. It's a brass bell, and it came from a lump of coal in Virginia. This is the one that was discovered by a 10-year-old boy named Newton Richard Anderson in 1944. And it was found inside a large lump of coal. But there again, they didn't know any better, but they took it out of the coal, and they took a nice wire brush and a bunch of lye, and they scrubbed the time out of it and cleaned all that coal and patina off of it, which was not a very good thing to do if you're going to authenticate it. But here's this bell, and we don't know for sure if that's really where it came from. It's just the guy's word. So if hopefully he's not lying, but he could be. So it's an interesting bell with an interesting figure on top. You can see a guy's hand there showing the scale, and it did have a clapper inside of it. Mr. Anderson, when he was older in 2007, did take a polygraph test about this, and he passed with flying colors. But again, that's not really proof. You know, polygraphs aren't really admissible in court because they can be faked. So I don't say that that's total proof. But here's what I think is really interesting about this, and I'm not sure if it means it's authentic or not, but if you compare it to bells they have in India and that region today, this is on the right here is what they call a Hindu deity Gardua, which is on top of this Gahanta bell, and they use them in Indian and Tibetan and Nepal for worship. They're usually made from brass and have a figure like that. And so if we look at the figure on top, zoom in here, there's the one from the bell found in Virginia by the Mr. Anderson, and there's the top of that particular one. There's a lot of similarities. You know, you got the thing on, some kind of hat on the head, and at first I thought these were the arms, but those are actually wings, and their arms and their hands are folded in front of them like they're praying, both of them, and they're also kneeling, kind of almost down on one knee, both of them the same. If you go back, you can see then a lot of other similarities, just the bell and the stem here looks very similar. So maybe that's evidence that this guy really didn't find it in this coal where he said, or somehow, I don't know how one of those bells from India would have got stuck in a lump of coal. But the other possibility is that maybe it really is from before the flood. If you think about what's the source of this worship they're doing in India and Nepal, well, ultimately it's Satan and demons, you know, and maybe they influenced people to build things in the same way before the flood for some kind of worship, idol worship they were doing back then. I don't know. Again, I'm not going to stake my life or my faith on any of these, but some of them are kind of cool to look at and think about. So let's see here. I wanted to give a quick plug for this. This is a book series that I like by Douglas Hurd, who's a Christian. And if you like this kind of stuff, if you like, you know, thinking about how things might have been before the flood, I think you'd enjoy this series. It's fiction, or maybe loosely could be considered historical fiction. He takes the account in the Bible and he builds things around that. Essentially what this is about is Noah's parents and about the birth of Noah and the events leading up to the flood. And so he speculates about all kinds of technology they might have had back then. And I think he probably was thinking about the Kosa artifact and the spark plug, because he talks about that and lots of other things. So again, it's not scripture. It's really more for fun. But it's a good read, and he mainly writes westerns, but I think it's cool that he wrote those books. So if you're interested, you might pick those up. They're available in regular book form or on audio. So again, I just want to say, my faith is not based on any of these supposedly pre-flood artifacts. If I found out that they were all hoaxes, that wouldn't change anything I believe. And I think, again, like we talked about last week, the best evidence for the flood being true, the biblical account, is all of the huge amount of sedimentary rock layers and that we know were laid down by water all over the earth, and these huge beds of literally trillions of fossils. That is the evidence for the flood and what the Bible says, not any of these artifacts necessarily. So in summary, we talked about soft tissue and dinosaur bones. I think that's powerful evidence for the biblical time scale. We talked about living fossils, coelacanth, dawn redwoods, which support the flood. Next time, we're going to talk about radiometric dating methods and whether they prove millions of years, as our evolutionary friends would like us to think. We're going to analyze that and see what we can figure out. We're going to talk about the Ice Age. I don't know who it was. Somebody came up to me a few weeks ago and asked about, well, was there really an Ice Age, and how does that fit with the Bible? We're going to talk about it next week. And we'll also have another fun class exercise. I'm sure you guys are excited about that. All right. With that, Derek, you want to close for us?
Father God, what a blessing it is to be able to gather with other believers this morning, Lord, to just study your word and look at the things that we can prove that you've taught us in the Bible, Lord. God, we thank you for Brent. We thank you for his preparation for this class. And Lord, we just pray that you continue to be with us as we go throughout our day. Thank you, God, so much for sending Christ to us. We pray this in his name. Amen.
Thank you.